Hello, I'm Dr. Alan Wolfelt, and I'm honored to serve as the director of the Center for Loss and Life Transition, which is located in the foothills of Fort Collins, Colorado. In recent days, I've been asked to share some of my writings and teachings, and I'm honored that my friends at Funeral Directors Life invited me to record a piece that I've written titled The Pandemic of Grief. I'm going to share it with you in hopes that it can be helpful to you. So the coronavirus is not only causing a viral pandemic, it's giving rise to a pandemic of grief. Death and grief go hand in hand, of course. Thousands of people have already died of COVID-19 worldwide. Many more, sadly, are dying right now. These are terrible losses for loved ones of these precious persons, and they'll need our support and our empathy in the months and in the years to come. What strikes me at this moment is that this aggressive new virus is threatening every single person on Earth with a myriad of losses of most every kind. Name something that you care about or that gives your life meaning, and in all likelihood, this attachment is now somehow affected or threatened in some way by the virus. Social distancing is forcing us to be apart from friends and family for weeks and possibly, sadly, months. Personal events have been postponed or called off, so we're unable to gather for life's most meaningful celebrations and rituals, from baptisms to birthdays to weddings to anniversaries to funerals. Or if we are able to gather, there's limitations on some of what you can do based on the realities that we're faced with. Public activities and experiences that brought us together have been canceled in many cases. Workplaces are shuttering or moving to work from home. Restaurants, museums, theaters are closed. Sporting events have been shut down. Town squares stand empty. While thanks to technology, we can still stay in constant contact with one another remotely, something that wasn't possible during the past prolonged international crises such as the 1980 flu pandemic. We are learning that there are limitations of our digital love and care. So let me share some things with you that I think can be helpful at this time, and one of which is to ask ourselves, what is grief? As human beings, whenever our attachments are threatened or harmed or are severed, we naturally come to grief. Grief is everything we can think and feel on the inside. We might experience shock or disbelief that it's occurring. We worry, which is a form of fear. We may become sad. We're at risk for feeling loss and loneliness. We might protest or get angry, which is, of course, very natural because protest is anchored often in the thought that I'd like things back the way they were before. So don't shame yourself for any of these natural human emotions of grief. Sum total of these various thoughts and feelings we're experiencing as a result of this virus, that's our grief. Those are our internal thoughts and feelings on the inside. Our pandemic grief will change from day to day and week to week. This virus is fast. As it sweeps across continents, we collectively take action to try to flatten the curve. New rules and limitations are popping up naturally every day. Restrictions are mounting and growing increasingly severe, necessarily so, sadly. Well, as that happens and things continue to change, the virus itself is likely to get worse, as we know, before it gets better. That's the nature of it. So let's ask ourselves, what are some things we can do to help ourselves emotionally, socially, if you will, spiritually? There are a couple things I think to understand about this pandemic of grief. First, it's normal and natural to experience our grief. It's simply part of our love and our attachment. And second, grief responds to awareness, attention, and expression, if you will. I'll say that again. It responds to awareness, our attention, and our expression. We'll feel better if we openly acknowledge and take our grief and allow it to become mourning. Mourning is being aware of your grief, giving it the attention it needs and deserves, and being able to express it outside of yourself. We've all heard a lot about how to care for ourselves in recent days and weeks physically with regard to the virus. But we also need, I think, to be conscious of our emotional, social, and spiritual health. During this time of great grief, mourning is the key to the pillars of self-care, if you will. When we're feeling emotional pain of this grief, we can tune into and allow ourselves to teach us what it is that we're worried about, what we're sad about, what we may be protesting. And then we can express it. We can talk to others about it in our household, on the phone, online. We can write about it in a journal. We can listen to music or watch movies or that help us access and understand and again, share our feelings. Mourning our grief in these ways helps soften it and gives us emergency emotional release and sustenance that we need to be able to survive. As my friend Earl Groman years ago used to say, grief shared and grief expressed is grief that we then feel support from each other in that context. So don't keep it to yourself. Take your grief, allow it to become mourning. Socially, we can't congregate in person right now. Did you know that the word congregate comes from the Latin root word com, which means together, and gregare, which means to gather in a flock? Kind of an interesting concept. But we can continue to make efforts to reach out to people we care about. Video calls are probably the best substitute in some ways for face-to-face conversations. Voice calls come second after that. Emails, texting, social media work as well. And don't forget the power of the handwritten letter. The point is to stay connected as much as we possibly can. When it comes to spiritual health, now is an especially resonant time to work on caring for your spirit, your work, your soul, your life force, call it what you will. One redeeming factor of enforced isolation is that it creates the opportunity for natural spiritual contemplation. In times of loss, we almost always wonder why things happen as they do. We naturally question the meaning of life in general and the meaning of our own life in particular. We turn our attention to our deepest beliefs, our values. We talk about our higher power, our God. We wonder about, again, why? Why? I often say why precedes how. Why did this happen precedes how am I going to survive that it did? So don't question yourself if you're doing some what I call why work right now. If you've been struggling with beliefs or values or meaning and life goals during the pandemic, you're experiencing spiritual aspects of your grief. And the best way to care for your spirit right now is to be intentional about giving it time and giving it attention. I recommend spending at least 15 minutes to 30 minutes a day at minimum on some form of spiritual practice that matches up with who you uniquely are as a human being. Whatever helps you get in touch with your divine spark, that which gives your life meaning and purpose. For some people, that might be meditation, or very appropriately, it could be prayer. For others, it might be reading a spiritual text, or reflecting on or speaking affirmations, or attending a religious or spiritual service online. Maybe it's doing yoga, writing in a journal, spending time observing nature, taking a walk outdoors. There's no one way. Simply being aware of your emotional, social, and spiritual health every day and being deliberate about your self-care in those specific areas will help you, as well as those around you, to survive these challenging times. There's no doubt this is a difficult time in our history, but it's also a moment in which our collective resources have never been greater and more capable. So let's be open, let's be honest, let's be kind to ourselves and to each other. Here's some specific suggestions for different circumstances. What about loneliness? The longer we're isolated in our homes, the lonelier we're at risk for becoming, of course. We're humans who are by nature social creatures. We're built to touch each other, to have connection, to have conversation. With the rise of technology and its modern day substitution for personal contact, we're already suffering from kind of a loneliness epidemic, if you will. But the coronavirus social distancing efforts are making it and will continue to make that even more naturally difficult. My best suggestion here is to reach out proactively to others in all the ways that you can think of right now. And as often as you can, for not only your benefit, but for their benefit. If you or someone you know is at a particular risk for loneliness right now, ask for assistance. Find friends, family members, neighbors who are willing to create support team. Most people are happy to help, but sometimes need suggestions on how to do that. So watch out, not only for your own loneliness, but it's a great time to watch out for your neighbors, your friends, and your family. What about isolated seniors? On a related note, many seniors are particularly isolated right now. As you know, older people are at much higher risk for serious illness and death from the virus and are having to self-isolate even more strictly. If you are an isolated senior that's reflecting on my words here and the loneliness of self-care tips that I've offered, those then apply to you. If you'd like to, on the other hand, you're a person who wants to help an isolated senior, brainstorm with others ways in which you can still provide comfort and safety to those folks. For example, deliveries of food or books or personal notes might be helpful. Touching base by phone once or twice a day could make a world of difference. Be creative and practical in your efforts, and most of all, offer frequent and consistent contact. You know, another special circumstance that applies here concerns seniors being cared for in long-term care facilities that have instituted no visitor policies quite naturally during this pandemic. Such policies, while necessary right now, are also, of course, separating people from those that they care about deeply. I've already heard of a number of situations in which an elderly resident is actively dying, but their family, unfortunately, isn't allowed to be by their side because of the restrictions. That's a heartbreak indeed, and I can offer no equal substitute for physical proximity at this pivotal moment in a family's life. But I would encourage families to do whatever they can to convey their love. For example, it's possible to write a letter to the person who's dying and ask a care attendant to read it out loud to them. Making a video recording of yourself as if you were talking directly to that person. That's another idea. How about asking for special music to be played and special memorabilia or flowers placed in the room? It's only limited by your creativity to help bring comfort to people, even in the face of some of these restrictions. What about far-flung families? Many family members are separated from one another at the moment. Some live far apart, but wish they could be closer together. Travel is challenged right now, may not be possible, and for elderly or at-risk family members, we know that physical proximity would be inadvisable anyway. Again, I'd suggest being in touch as much as possible and as often as possible in any way you can. If you feel a concern or love for someone who's far away, call them, tell them, send them a text, write them an email, send a heartfelt greeting card with a personal letter. Your grief over a possible threat to their well-being, yours or both, is tugging at you, so give it voice. They will feel loved and supported, and you'll feel relieved and feel that love as well. What about canceled events? In many ways, special events are the moments in our lives which we most profoundly feel the love we share with our family and our friends. They bring meaning to life itself. We dream of and plan for significant expected events such as graduations, retirements, family vacations. And when unexpected significant events arise, like serious injuries or deaths or funerals, we drop everything so we can be together. But we're living in a moment in time in which most of these events are being canceled in an effort to protect the health of the greater community and the most vulnerable among us. Naturally, we're bereft over the loss of those opportunities to gather with those that we love and immerse ourselves in that which is most meaningful in our lives. Well, whenever possible, I'd advocate that such events, of course, that are postponed instead of being canceled, if you will. If the graduation or retirement date comes and goes, maybe the celebration can still be held later on. This is particularly important with things like rites of passage. If a public funeral can't take place shortly after a death, then some kind of service should be scheduled in the weeks and months ahead once we're out of this tunnel. Untimely gatherings are not ideal, of course, but they're much better than no gathering at all. Virtual events may also be, of course, a good idea. Baby showers, christenings broadcast live online are another option, of course. But most of all, what I hope you will do when an upcoming event is canceled is pay attention to your feelings about the cancellation and then communicate those feelings to people who form the centerpiece of that event. If a wedding is canceled, for instance, write heartfelt notes to the bride and the groom and any other family members that you are close to, telling them that you are looking forward to the event, what it means to you, and what your hopes and dreams are for them in the months to come. They'll find great comfort and meaning in the words, and you'll feel good about having expressed your support. What about serious illness and death? If it hasn't already for you, the moment will likely come during this pandemic when someone you know about or care about, maybe not someone in your closest circle of friends, maybe it's a friend, a neighbor, becomes seriously ill, perhaps sadly even dies. I'm certainly not trying to borrow trouble here, but I also understand that numerically you and I may both find ourselves in this unfortunate circumstance at some point in the coming months. Such is the nature of COVID-19. Add to the complicate matters furthermore, it may happen at a time when we're still quarantined in our homes and public ceremonies are still forbidden. Virtually all of us are grieving this possibility right now. As you have reflected on the words I've shared here, you know that I'm an advocate of being open and honest about our inner grief. In the coming days, your grief includes this worry. Please talk about it with other people, on the phone, online, through social media. And if such a reality comes to be a part of your life, I hope you'll remember that your grief is normal and it's necessary. And it needs and deserves expression. It's our capacity to love that requires a necessity to mourn. Here in North America, in the interior West, where I am today in the foothills of Colorado, it feels strange to be rolling onto this ramp of a viral epidemic. We know the route that we're heading down, but we don't know exactly how bad it's going to be or how each of us in our local communities or we personally are going to be affected along the path. Because of this uncertainty, our grief is in part anticipatory at this point. While we're already grieving very real closures, cancellations, limitations, we're also normally and naturally anticipating unknown griefs that might come. That's also a natural part of our love. I hope that we will emerge from this viral and grief pandemic a more conscious, a more cohesive, a more caring world. I hope it transforms us for the better, not the worse. Transformation, I remind you, means an entire change in form. You're transformed by this, I'm transformed by this, all of us are. But I hope some of the words that I've shared with you helps you acknowledge that we are faced with not only the pandemic of this illness, but the pandemic of our grief. And if we can acknowledge and give words to our grief and allow ourselves to mourn well, we, my friends, will go on to live well, and we will go on to love well. Hope, an expectation of a good that is yet to be. We will come out of this tunnel, and we will come out of this tunnel together. Thank you so much for allowing me a few minutes of your time to talk about the grief pandemic. I hope it's been helpful.